This is episode 5 in a series chronicling my adventures in building a DIY CNC router. If you've missed the previous episodes, I encourage you to go back and check them out. We're finishing up the major construction this time, so let's get to it and let's give it a try. By this point, summer on the lake had rolled around, so I took a little time off. Coming back fresh and rested after a 7-month sabbatical, it was time to mount the gantry on the Y rollers. For this, I'll need to print out the number 6 drill guide as well as dig out the number 5 Y roller drill guide. I removed the upper and lower linear rails from the gantry, making sure to properly mark them as upper and lower as well as left and right ends. I also dismantled the Y ball screws as well as the 2 plates from the Y rollers so I could move them back and forth freely. Next, using the number 6 drill guide, I marked out the hole locations for the 6.5mm holes on the bottom right quadrant of the gantry and drilled them out. I also slightly counterbored the holes to be certain there were no burrs which could keep the gantry from seating properly. I pushed both Y rollers all the way to the front of the machines so they would stop against the BKHM risers, placed a linear rail mounting guide tight up against the backside, and clamped the guides in place so the Y rollers cannot move. I took several measurements to verify the 2 Y rollers were about as lined up to each other as possible. I placed a couple pieces of double-sided tape on the back of the number 5 drill guide, inserted a couple of fasteners for alignment, and set the number 6 guide in place, pressing together firmly to stick them together with the tape. I then placed a couple pieces of double-sided tape inside the number 6 guide, which will ultimately stick to the gantry. With the guides prepped, I placed the gantry on the Y rollers, taking note of the correct orientation, and inserted 2 fasteners in the right side holes I had just drilled a few minutes ago. This would give me enough clearance to lift the end of the gantry, insert the prepared drill guides onto the Y roller, making sure the guide was fully seated against the edge of the Y roller tube, and setting the gantry down onto the exposed tape. I removed the screws from the left end and carefully flipped the gantry over, making certain not to disturb the newly applied drill guide assembly that was stuck to it. I was then able to transfer punch straight through both guides to get the proper alignment for the 5 6.5mm holes on the bottom left side of the gantry, which were then drilled and countersunk. I switched gears for a few minutes and knocked out the 2 aluminum gantry roller braces, which are made from some 6063 2x3" angle. Per the Fusion file in the wiki, I need the number 7C gantry Y roller drill guide, so I printed that out. I also noted that the braces are 77mm in length. Armed with all the necessary information, I made my marks and cut the angle to length. I use a chop saw to cut the aluminum with a fine-pitched blade. This setup makes nice, square, clean cuts, but the aluminum always gets a little sticky on the flat portion, and my breaker invariably trips at least once. It was not lost on me that the fingers were in there a bit close on this cut. The worst part about it was that the aluminum got hot, so I needed to put a glove on to hold it. 2 strikes in one operation. It would be best to fashion some sort of clamp to hold the workpiece, and if you're doing this, I recommend you take that route. Another transfer punch operation, and it's on to the drill press to make the 6.5mm holes. With the braces done, I proceeded to bolt the gantry down to the Y-axis rollers. It's not at all easy working in this confined space, but with much perseverance and some nicked up fingers, I got the gantry installed. Out of curiosity, I tried to shuttle the gantry back and forth on the rails and was not impressed. In fact, while filming, I actually said out loud, I wouldn't say it moves easily. This is certainly a cause for concern, as I would have expected a bit more fluid motion. Perhaps with the bearing blocks properly lubed and closer attention paid during final installation, things will improve, I hope. A bit deflated, I transfer punched the locations for the gantry braces and called it a day. The next morning, with mildly renewed vigor, I got to work on the end stop sensors and cable chain mounting locations. As stated in the wiki, I measured 25 millimeters from the front and back of both Y-axis roller tubes and scribed lines. On the left roller will be the location for the end stop sensor, and on the right roller are the end stop sensor and cable chain mount. To get the frame trigger mounted in the proper location, the wiki says to set the Y roller carriage 15 millimeters from the BF riser if building a single carriage system. It also suggests to use the Y rail centering guide as a spacer. Since the spacers were a bit over 15 millimeters, I made up a couple new ones in Fusion, printed them off, and used them on the right and left sides to be certain everything was equal, then clamped the whole thing in place. With all that done, I used the 10A drill guide to transfer punch the locations. I found this part to be frustratingly imprecise because everything wanted to move on me. I believe there's some room for adjustment with the actual end stop sensor, so it shouldn't be a problem. I think I was still a bit grumpy from yesterday when the gantry did not move as nicely as I'd hoped. Anyway, I marked out the locations of both Y rollers, but I didn't film the right side. The same measurements were made on the Y roller, 25 millimeters in from each side for the end stop sensor and the cable chain mounts. I covered the bearing block to keep chips out of the bearing and drilled to 5 millimeters and tapped for M6. At this point, things become a bit fluid. My build is departing a bit from the Fusion file because of the discrepancies that were discussed in episode 3. As a result, my filming became a bit spotty as I was improvising a bit. Basically, I used the same procedure on the gantry with the 15 millimeter offset to locate the sensor mounts. I also marked out the locations of the cable chain guides according to the wiki, basically about every 300 millimeters. It isn't crucial for these locations to be exact. With everything marked, I disassembled the machine again and drilled and tapped all the remaining holes, including the Y rollers. Finally, I decided that's enough for today, and that's enough for this video. The major construction is complete, and so far things seem to be on track. Please leave a comment with your thoughts on the build so far. Strike a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode, or we'll change gears a bit to prep and paint the steel. Until then, I'm mainejason. Get out there and give it a try.